Hi, I'm David Prosser. I'm the Director of Literary Services for the festival. I'm standing in for Anthony Cimolino, our General Director. Welcome to our webcast. I have the great pleasure and honor to be hosting a conversation with Simon Callow, who is performing his one-man show, There Reigns Love, at the Tom Patterson Theatre. Simon Callow is a distinguished British actor and director and author. Made his debut in, I think, 1973, is that right?
Correct.
Well, that's right. Created the role of Amadeus, of Mozart in the original National Theatre production of Amadeus. Appears in the film of Amadeus. Maybe best known to North American audiences for the role of Gareth in the film Four Weddings and a Funeral. It was his funeral. And now we're really, really fortunate to have him here. Oh, he's also been he's also done some one-person shows about Charles Dickens, has written about Charles Dickens, and in fact, for those of us who are fans of Doctor Who, whom I am one, portrayed Charles Dickens in one memorable episode of that wonderful BBC science fiction series. We have him here because he's doing this show about Shakespeare's sonnets. And I use the word show because, Simon, this isn't really a play as such, is it?
No, not really.
Do you have a word for how you would describe this entertainment?
That's a nice word, entertainment. I suppose investigation, perhaps,
Yeah.
of Shakespeare's sonnets, yes.
So obviously, the question now is going to be, what nature does this investigation take? This show This is something you've had in your mind for quite a long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't claim any credit for the theory that underlies the show. A man now dead called John Pardle, who was a psychoanalyst, like many people before him, had become obsessed by the sonnets. And he came to the conclusion that the order in which they're published, 1609 edition, was a deliberate scrambling of another order, an original order. Right. And the scrambling was done in order to conceal the identities of the individuals concerned. Because the sonnets, even if you read them, which is rather hard to do without any guidance, you will see that in amongst those 154 poems, there's some sort of a background story, a submerged background story. That there's the poet, there's a young man of great beauty whom the poet loves, and there's the poet's mistress. And the young man of great beauty and the mistress have an affair, and the poet has to deal with that, and then he has to deal with the fact that the young man ceases to love him. So those are the stories.
Right.
But they're not very clearly delineated. And when John Pardle did his reordering, it suddenly became very clear what was going on. It's a complicated story, but you can absolutely follow it. And a lot of the poems that are sort of meaningless suddenly become very meaningful and rather powerful.
Now, did you actually know John Pardle personally?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, John submitted a manuscript that he'd written to the National Theatre.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who was sort of in your job, really, at the National Theatre, said, we should try this, we should test this theory out.
Right.
And so he phoned me and said, would you like to be one of a group of actors who does this? And I, in the megalomania of my first flush, said, no, I wouldn't actually suggest that it was a good idea to do it with lots of other actors, just me.
Yes.
I'll do it all. And that's how I ended up doing it in 1980 on the stage of the Olivier Theatre in London, which is about the size of the Festival Theatre here in Stratford, Ontario, one afternoon doing all 154 sonnets, which is frankly insane. It's a kamikaze undertaking because it's too tough, both on the actor and on the audience. However, it did have one advantage. It did show that there was a story there, very, very clear.
So now, I don't know, you know, without giving away too much of the show itself, this story, you've mentioned the mistress, the dark lady of the sonnets, as we all know her, and the young man. And the poet. So the poet is perhaps Shakespeare himself?
Well, that's the big question. And it's not one that I can absolutely give an answer to. But it's my view, and certainly that's the way I perform it, it's my view that these poems have an absolute ring of authenticity, of lived personal human experience. it is, of course, perfectly possible that as a sort of extraordinary literary challenge, Shakespeare might have written in the voice of somebody else all the way through. It seems unlikely to me. On the other hand, a lot of the poems are to do with age and aging, and if we believe, as we do, believe that the young man in question was William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, then that suggests to us that because of that young man's age, that Shakespeare would have been in his mid-30s, early mid-30s. It's my contention that when you're in your early mid-30s, you are aware of aging. But not so much when you're in your late 20s.
Yes.
It's something happens when you're 30. Mortality intervenes, and I think that makes sense to me.
So William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, is the Mr. W.H. to whom the sonnets are dedicated, and that very cryptic, we think.
We think. I mean, there's huge controversy about all of this. Many people have been put forward as the possible WH, including, of course, the Earl of Southampton, who's probably the current favourite. But his initials were, as it happens, HW. But that doesn't deter the scholars.
No, because, of course, the Elizabethans like to scramble things up. So the idea was that the sonnets were actually deliberately scrambled to conceal the identities of those involved. And that by reordering them, John Padel has revealed the underlying narrative. So these poems add up to a very intimate, emotional autobiography.
Of an aspect of Shakespeare's life. Yes, absolutely. I believe that because the degree of self-obliteration which the poet reveals in these poems, his ability to take every emotion that is thrown at him and live through it right to the end seems to be, to me, as someone who's acted in his plays and looked at a lot of the evidence about his life, that seems to me the kind of guy he was. He was a man who, once he had just to think of an emotion and it was already coursing through his body. And I think that's what these poems show so very, very clearly, is the poet's mind at work, and that's a wonderful thing.
Wow. Now the sonnets, I mean, many people look at the sonnets and think, apart from those ones that are very well known, people think, gosh, these are awfully dense and difficult poems. But you have managed to, I mean, you're not doing them all, you're doing what, 84 each, but you've managed to clarify them so extraordinarily, in my view, having seen the show.
Oh, that's great.
Making the ones we know come alive for the first time in my, not for the first time, but producing new meanings, new insights, and then the more obscure ones suddenly become very clear.
That simply comes about because of the framework that we have. So it all has meaning. There are still certain poems, even in John's version, that for me are terminally elusive. But so many of the sonnets have suddenly come into focus as a result of this reordering.
And of course, you're not just performing the sonnets; you are delivering the narrative that explains this theory. Now, is that narrative of your own devising, or is it taken from John Padel's?
It's a kind of a paraphrase of John, but also it's also a comment on John's theories too, because sometimes even John's theories stretch credulity a little bit. But my contention again is that, and it would be his contention too, that his starting point was not the history or the story, but the poems themselves. And it was structuring the poems in the order that he found for them that gave him the story. They're structured because of internal themes of language and so on and so forth. And therefore, of course, exactly the meaning will become clearer. And
it does. I mean, I think it's a wonderful performance and just fascinating.